Malacañang Palace is the official residence and principal workplace of the President of the Philippines, located in the capital city of Manila. The palace is in fact a complex of buildings, built largely in Spanish colonial and neoclassical style. The original structure was built in 1750 by Don Luís Rocha as a summer house along the Pasig River. It was purchased by the state in 1825 as the summer residence for the Spanish Governor-General. After the June 3, 1863 earthquake destroyed the Palacio del Gobernador in the walled city of Manila, it became the Governor-General's official residence. After sovereignty over the islands was ceded to the United States in 1898, it became the residence of the American governors, with General Wesley Merritt being the first. Since 1863, the palace has been occupied by 18 Spanish governors-general, 14 American military and civil governors, and later the presidents of the Philippines. The palace had been enlarged and refurbished several times since 1750. The grounds were expanded to include neighboring estates, and many buildings were demolished and constructed during the Spanish and American periods. Most recently, the palace complex was again drastically remodeled and extensively rebuilt during the term of Ferdinand Marcos. Among the presidents of the present Fifth Republic, only Gloria Macapagal Arroyo has actually lived in the main palace, with all others residing in nearby properties that form part of the larger palace complex. The palace has been seized several times as the result of protests, starting with the People Power Revolution, the 1989 coup attempt, the 2001 Manila riots, and the EDSA-3 May 1 riots. Etymology. Whence Malacañang. Place names often provide a valuable and sometimes colorful window on the past, preserving how earlier generations perceived a locality as distinct and noteworthy as a point of reference. Filipino geography is especially rich and evocative, with such names as, to take one common form found around Manila, Maycorayan, Maysantol, Maybunga, and the origin of Manila itself, Maynilad. There are also places such as Pulanglupa and the now-defunct Malapad-na-Bato. Further examples abound. If scholars are to be believed, Malacañang, a small area by the Pasig River, is also just such a name, but with a less obvious origin that has prompted different etymological explanations since the 19th century. There are 4 possibilities, all evoking something different. Malacañang as a place of work. The earliest explanation was given by the Spanish historian Felipe de Goventas in his 1877 Compendio de la Historia de Filipinas, and gives an echo of occupational life. Goventas wrote that Malacañang quiere ser en castellano sitio del pescador. This was repeated in the 1895 Historia General de Filipinas by José Montero y Vidal and the Historia de Filipinas by Manuel Artigas y Cueva in 1916. In 1972, Juliana Maramag in her work on Malacañang history supplied the Tagalog word mamalakaya, or fisherman. On this view then, the name was originally something like mamalakayahan, with the addition of the Tagalog suffix for place of, and must have been later simplified and Hispanized as Malacañang. Malacañang as a site of worship. In the mid-1930s, the assistant director of the National Library, Eulogio Rodriguez, wrote an undated letter to William T. Hinn, who was an advisor to the then American Governor-General, Frank Murphy. Drawing from unfortunately unknown sources, Rodriguez stated that Malacañang had 2 possible derivations. The Tagalog Malacañang, meaning a place of many great ones, or the Spanish Malacana, or evil bamboo, or evil cane, These two alternative explanations are actually related in the general basis. The thick groves of bamboo that were most likely abundant at Malacañang in earlier times would have been typically regarded by pre-evangelized Filipinos as the dwelling place of powerful spirits, or nuno. Other dwelling places would have been the streams and large kalumpang trees also profuse in the area. The great ones referred to were almost certainly these spirits, rather than actual living people, and therefore Malacañang by this version truly evokes a central element of early Filipino civilization, the often delicate relationship between people and the environment around them, populated as it was with forces that could undo a man's labors and fortune. The appeasement of such great ones was an important part of Filipino religiosity, and the evangelizing missionaries were much concerned with stamping out these and other pagan practices, while Malacañang, or a similar oft-proposed variant Malacandayan, meaning there are great ones there in its acknowledgement of powerful spirits among the dense bamboo, prompts respect and then perhaps fear. The other possibility that Rodriguez proposed suggests something wholly negative. Malacañang may reasonably have been coined by proselytizing friars as part of their efforts to have parishioners look more to the Gospels and the one true faith rather than to such a Malacañang lugar or place of evil bamboo. Malacañang is the home of a big man. The Rocha family cherished a legend that would have the word Malacañang as directly attributable to Luís Rocha himself. In a 1972 interview conducted by Liana Maramag, Antonio Rocha related that his illustrious ancestor would take siesta in the house that he had built and that the Sikh watchman would hush noisy passers-by. Malacañang, or he is a big man, he would say, gesturing towards the house of the sleeping tycoon who would not be amused at being prematurely roused. In this way, the house and its immediate area came to be named Malacañang as a reference from the waterway. A glance at a map is suggestive of a fourth possibility. Malacañang is on the right bank of the Pasig River, and there is a Tagalog word referring to of the right, which is Malacañang. But so what? The river is somewhat long and meandering, with a correspondingly lengthy right bank. However, the river at Malacañang divides around the islet of Convalescencia as it does nowhere else along its course. Hence, the need to make a distinction between left and right would seem to be most relevant at this very place. Perhaps then, Malacañang's origin is as a point of reference in the lively and ancient traffic on the water of the Pasig River. In the end, there is no conclusive evidence that points one way or another to the true origin of the name of Malacañang. The area was swampy, insalubrious, and hence uninhabited, but it could have been a good fishing spot and almost certainly was perceived, precisely because of its marshy, unhealthy, bamboo-teeming riverbank, as an abode of many nuno. The Rocha derivation sounds whimsical, but even treating it as a serious possibility, personality-conscious Filipinos would surely have remembered in the local traditions the formidable caballero who had lived so largely in their midst in the second half of the 18th century. And finally, Malacañang as a landmark for riverine life, while intuitively appealing, is pure speculation. Given everything, the derivation of Malacañang as place of the fisherman has the advantage of being put forward at a much earlier and different time, in the 1870s, when economic development had only just started and oral traditions would have perhaps been more intact. In current political and common parlance, Malacañang and the palace has become metonyms for the presidency, the executive branch, and by extension, the national government as a whole. Spelling whatever the origin, the word Malacañang is indisputably Tagalog. During the Spanish colonial era, Spanish-language books published during the era spelled the word as Malacañang. Early Spanish plans for the palace spelled the name as Malacañang. The name was allegedly changed to Malacañang during the American occupation of the Philippines from 1898 until 1946, despite the fact that "eng" as a final sound is very familiar in the English language. However, after the inauguration of President Ramon Magsaysay on December 30, 1953, the Philippine government changed the name to Malacañang, residence of the President of the Philippines, in honor of Palace's historical roots. During the administration of President Corazon Aquino, for historical reasons, government policy has been to make the distinction between Malacañang Palace, official residence of the President, and Malacañang, office of the President. The restoration of the designation Malacañang Palace was reflected in official stationery and signage, including the often seen backdrop in the press room modeled after the White House sign. In practice, the heading Malacañang Palace is reserved for official documents personally signed by the President, while those delegated to and signed by subordinates use the heading Malacañang. History. Spanish colonial era. The Spanish captains general and the later governors general originally resided at the Palacio del Gobernador fronting the city square in the walled city of Intramuros in Manila. Malacañang Palace was originally built as a casita in 1750, made of adobe wood, with interiors paneled with finest nara and mole. It sits in a 16-hectare land owned by Spanish aristocrat Don Antonio V. Rocha. It was subsequently sold to Col. José Miguel Formento in November 16, 1802 for a sum of 1,000 pesos. Later it was sold to the government upon his death in January 1825. It became the temporary summer residence of the governors-general when the heat became unbearable in Intramuros with its gardens and a veranda along the wide river. Rafael de Equegui Birmingham, previously governor of Puerto Rico, became the first Spanish governor-general to reside in the palace. Finding the place too small, a wooden two-story building was added to the back of the original structure, as well as smaller buildings for aides, guards and porters, as well as stables, carriage sheds and a boat landing for river-borne visitors. Between 1875 and 1879, reconstruction and expansion resumed after the palace was hit by more earthquakes, typhoons and fire. An 1869 earthquake hit Malacañang, thus, repairs are made urgent. Posts and supports were repaired or replaced. Balconies are reinforced. Cornices are provided for the roof. Roofing was replaced with GI roofing to light and loads to the walls. The interior was refurbished. By the end of Spanish rule in 1898, Malacañang Palace was a rambling complex of mostly wooden buildings that had sliding capas windows, patios and azoteas. In 1880, an earthquake occurred again. Porticos were added to the facade to shelter waiting carriages. In 1885, the flagpole was installed in front of the palace. Decaying woodwork, stuck shell windows, leaking roofs, loose kitchen tiles, drooped stables. These are some of the reflected deterioration due to numerous natural phenomena. A total of PHP 22,000 was spent for renovation and reconstruction. American colonial rule. When the Philippines came under the American sovereignty following the Spanish-American War, Malacañang Palace became the residence of the American Governor-General. Gen. Wesley Merritt became the first American military governor to reside at the palace in 1898, while William Howard Taft became the first civil governor resident in 1901. They continued to improve and enlarge the palace, buying more land and reclaiming more of the Pasig River. From 1875 up to 1879, renovations were conducted. Left and right wings were added. An azotea facing the river was joined to the existing azotea. A staircase was transferred to the center of the foyer, and galleries were built around the stairway where the public could circulate during crowded receptions. Ground level was raised above the floodline, replacing wood with concrete, and beautifying the interiors with hardwood paneling and adding magnificent chandeliers. Commonwealth era. The complex became residence of the President of the Philippines upon the establishment of the Commonwealth of the Philippines on November 15, 1935. President Manuel L. Quezon became the first Filipino resident of the palace. It has been the Philippine President's official residence ever since. One major improvement addressed with American period was solution to flood control. He tackled the flooding problem around Malacañang by reclaiming 15 feet of the Pasig River bank and building a concrete wall. He also converted the ground floor into a social hall. In addition to that, Americans used shutters alike of Japanese shoji to soften intensity of tropic sunlight. Emilio Aguinaldo, recognized as the first Filipino president but of the revolutionary government, the first Philippine Republic, established during the Spanish rule. He did not reside but was later taken to the palace by the Americans as a political prisoner for a few weeks in 1901 after his capture in Palanan, Isabela. He resided in his private home as president, now the Aguinaldo Shrine, in Cavite. Malacañang Palace survived the Second World War, the only major government building left standing after the bombing of Manila. Only the southwest side of the palace, which would have been the state dining room and its service area, was damaged by shelling. During the Second World War in 1942, Japanese turned Malacañang into a gilded prison. Quezon moved his seat to Corregidor, the headquarters of General Douglas MacArthur. Efforts of Macapagal. By the time former President Diosdado Macapagal moved to the palace, it was in need of immense repair and restoration works. First Lady Mrs. Eva Macapagal initiated a massive beautification project which drove sidewalk vendors away from the grounds and turned muddy areas to landscape gardens. Sovereign Philippines. The longest residents of the palace were President Ferdinand Marcos and his wife, Imelda, who resided there from December 1965 to February 1986. Following a student uprising that nearly breached the palace gates in the early 1970s, martial law was declared, and the palace complex and its surrounding neighborhood was closed to the public. The Pasig River, cleaner in the 19th century, had developed a foul odor in the 1970s and became a breeding ground for mosquitoes. Between 1978–79, Mrs. Marcos oversaw the reconstruction of the palace to her own extravagant tastes. The palace was expanded with the facades on all four sides moved forward. The presidential quarters were enlarged on the front along J.P. Laurel, destroying the small garden and driveway leading to the private entrance, while a new dining room and expanded guest suites were built on the main entrance front. On the side facing the river, the ceremonial hall was built to replace the azoteas, veranda and pavilion. A larger presidential bedroom was constructed on the remaining side, with a disco at roof level. The layout of the old rooms was retained, although the rooms themselves were enlarged and new bedroom suites inserted in what had been part of the garden. The old palace was gutted almost entirely, not only to meet the needs of the presidential family, but also because the buildings had been weakened by patch-up renovations over a century that had resulted in unstable floors and leaking roofs. The building is now made of poured concrete, concrete slabs, steel girders, ladders and trusses, all concealed under elegant hardwood floors, panels and ceilings. It is fully bulletproofed, cooled by central air conditioning with filters, and has an independent power supply. Architect George Ramos oversaw the reconstruction, which was closely supervised by Mrs. Marcos. The refurbished palace was inaugurated on May 1, 1979, the Marcos' silver wedding anniversary. Several changes were implemented to beautify the Malacañang Palace. The servants' quarters building was transformed, what we know today as the Premier Guest House. The veranda overlooking Pasig River was walled up to become the new Mahalaca Hall. Across the river, a guest house was constructed. It is situated on the grounds of Malacañang Golf Club. It was called Bahay Pangarap. When Marcos was overthrown in the 1986 People Power Revolution, the palace complex was stormed by protesters who roamed the grounds. The international worldwide media subsequently exposed the excesses of the Marcos family that the latter had left at the palace during the few hours it had before it fled to Hawaii, including Mrs. Marcos' infamous collection of thousands of shoes. The main palace was later reopened to the public and was converted into a museum for 3 years. After Marcos' exile, a lifestyle of excess was revealed. Some of these excesses include 15 square feet of a sunken bathtub with a mirrored ceiling and an altar with a 19th-century religious statuary of ivory with gold-embroidered robes. In an effort to distance herself from the decadence of the Fourth Republic, President Corazon Aquino chose to live in the nearby Alagi mansion but held government affairs in the executive building. Her successor, President Fidel Ramos, followed suit. After the second EDSA revolution, security in the palace was tightened due to attempts against the government. Ramos' First Lady restored Bahay Pangarap, which became an extension of the Malacañang Ceremonial Hall. The chapel was also retained, despite Ramos' different religious point of view. President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, who had once resided in Malacañang during the rule of her father, President Diosdado Macapagal, chose to live again in the main palace after her accession in 2001. 2 presidents chose to reside in the Bahay Pangarap, the guest villa on the south bank of the Pasig River across the main palace. In due its term, Bahay Pangarap was renamed into Bahay Pagbabago.